ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into part 4 of the series, so be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. The hours were long, far longer than any had been before. At least, that was how he felt. Red Hood's gloved right hand held the contoured handle of his sniper rifle tightly. For the last 2 days without rest or sleep, he watched the doors leading to the Detonarat building, noting every instance of when someone entered or exited, what they looked like, and what direction they walked in after leaving. Anything and everything lest he be left alone with his own thoughts because, as it turns out, the world isn't kind to someone who defies the natural order. At first, he had ignored the small irritations that would be no more than a minor annoyance. The sound of dripping water in his ears, an itch on a piece of skin he could never reach, and the small instances of phantom pain he would experience. However, in quiet moments like this, he was forced to remember, to ironically live both his death and his rebirth. The feeling of his skin turning cold, the warmth of his blood escaping, vision darkening until he could no longer see. Then, he woke with his airways blocked as he drowned in the water of the Lazarus pit. His body, mind, and soul knew that, at that very moment, he had no right to be there, that somehow he did not belong in this world. Even now, that choking feeling returned, like a rope was growing tighter on his neck with each passing second. Yet no matter how much he moved his head, tried to clear his throat, or rationalize the feeling, he could not rid himself of it. It reminded him that despite him sitting here now, the League, Shigaraki had finished him. He was now no better than a living corpse. Izuku Midoriya, Inko Midoriya. They both died in that warehouse. It was only by pure coincidence that he was alive. An instance of both bad and good luck. Looking at the desk that supported his rifle, Red Hood scanned the wood. Abundant were the wrappers of the nutrition bars he had been surviving off of. Next to them are empty bottles of water. The luxury of a hot meal was long gone, and so was a minute of shut-eye. Not that he would want it. Although the silence brought memories, sleep only got nightmares. A sigh erupted from Red Hood, right eye still focused on his sniper's scope. The hour and shade of the sky marked the end of the 3rd day he had stayed in this figurative utopia. Daika City, from what he observed, was a place with no issue. Citizens walked around with their heads held high. Heroes roamed the streets with smiles, and the villains? Their attacks were low and in areas that seemed controlled. At least, that was what he garnered from the news broadcasts. It was something that he wanted to achieve in Japan, but seeing just a part of it as a reality felt wrong, almost disturbing. It's impossible. He thought this since his encounter with the cafe. This solidarity and togetherness was artificial, and if not that, then it was manipulated. It made him realize that the dream of Izuku of Deku was a fantasy of some naive kid. This peacefulness would not last long. There were more villains like the League. Butcherers, murderers, animals. Pressure built on Red Hood's body. His muscles began to lightly ache, and his bones trembled while his skin itched. It was only for a second, but Red Hood looked out from the scope of his rifle and down to his left hand. It shook and danced along his palm and fingers like red lightning. He had partly forgotten his quirk. Nowadays, he hardly used it. He didn't know whether to blame himself or his resurrection, but the quirk was far more unstable than it was at first. He guessed it was both. He allowed his quirk to run rampant, his fist clenching as he forced his trembling to stop. He let the pressure build continuously for a few seconds before finally cutting the quirk off. With a grunt, Red Hood sat back in his chair, taking off his left glove. The skin underneath, generally of a healthy complexion, was already turning a light purple. Just a few seconds of use bruised his skin, and if he used it longer, his muscles would begin tearing and nerves would start frying. Proper vessel. The words almost seemed to mock him, if it were seen by anyone who knew of what happened between him and All Might. This lack of control and stability would make them inclined to take the fated hero's side. Re-gloving his left hand, Red Hood looked back through his scope. He could see the Dintrat building's lights shut off level by level until only the light of the first level remained. Exiting from the front doors was the same member of the custodian staff that he had seen for the past 2 nights. Like always, after the custodians left, he checked the notes he took down. Here, he noticed something that made his shoulder lean into the stock of his rifle and his left hand hold the underside of the rail. 5 local heroes of major hero agencies, interviewer and TV personality Chitose Kazuki, politician Koku Hanabata, and board member of Feel Good Incorporated Tomoyasu Chikazoku. All of them entered the building one after another, but none, not a single one, had left in the past 4 hours. Although Dintrat was a support item manufacturer, the group listed all visiting on the same day and not leaving. That wasn't a coincidence. It was clear something had spurred the group into this meeting. From the side of the rifle's frame, Red Hood's right index finger dropped to hold the trigger. It was needless to point out how suspicious the entire situation was. Still, his finger went back to rest. It didn't matter how suspicious this was. Until they showed up, he wouldn't make a move. The issues of the city did not matter to him. Although he would remember who these heroes and personalities were, they would not be a hindrance to his purpose here. If needed, he would unalive them, consequences or otherwise be damned. All there was to do now was wait, yet again. All she was able to do was stare. The white capsules that sat in her hand were a sign of hope. Hope to stop the aching of her abdomen. NGH. Namuri sat on her bed, her half-naked form giving a view of almost her entire body. The gouge of flesh where her ribs sat was now light pink, and the wound, although currently closed, remained in the form of a scar. The aching was a reminder that despite the 3 days of healing via Recovery Girl, some of the injuries remained. Placing her slender hand on the skin, she could feel it throb, albeit only slightly. It wasn't enough to take her out of commission, but it was something worth taking care of. Pills in hand, the woman placed 2 into her mouth before grabbing a glass of water on her nightstand. With a sip, she swallowed the pills. Now, she had to wait until the effects kicked in. However, time wasn't on her side. The watch on her wrist was beeping loudly. Taking a deep breath, the woman stood her hand going to grab her hero costume that lay at her side. Unlatching the watch on her wrist, she slowly dressed in her hero suit before she adjusted the gear she had on hand. Without Eri, her room felt and looked completely empty. She wished she had a moment to tell the young girl she would be back soon, but she couldn't lie. What they were walking into was going to be a perpetual hellscape, one that the chances of survival were getting slimmer the more she heard about it. It hurt to not see the girl, but having her stay with the 2B class was for the best. The girls would no doubt take care of her. Equipped, the rated hero left her room and headed toward the front gates of UA. It was early morning, 4 a.m. to be exact. Between the 4 hours it would take to reach Daika and the setup, it would be around early afternoon when everything would go down. At least, that was how Nizu theorized it. Either way, that was another thing. Right now, her focus was on the site before her. Before the gate to UA was an ensemble of pro heroes, none of whom were slouches. Mirko, Endeavor, Fat Gum, Ryukyu, Gang Orca, and along with them were most of the UA staff, all except for Lunch Rush, 13, Recovery Girl, and All Might for apparent reasons. Other than those 3, the only noticeable absence was that of Aizawa. Before she could raise the question to everyone, Nizu spoke from the middle of the crowd. Standing atop Hound Dog's shoulder, the small animal's eyes swept the courtyard. In front of him was Spinner, the villain, dressed as usual whenever they encountered him. As we discussed, in a few short hours, you will all arrive at the outskirts of Daika City. Once there, you have between 2 and 2.5 hours to get into your positions until Spinner meets with the leader of the MLA. Remain unseen as much as you can. As we understand, the entirety of Daika City may be in allegiance. Hero, villain, or civilian. If they attack, we have been given the authority by the Hero Association to retaliate within reason. Once Spinner enters Red Hood's line of sight, be prepared. Knowing him, this vigilante will not remain still. Red Hood and League members are priority targets. Capture them if, and only if you have the opportunity. You all will only engage once the chance arrives. This battle is to be between Red Hood and the League. Your lives are more important. If the situation is to escalate beyond control, do not hesitate to retreat. Retreat? Yeah, right. This time I'll kick that helmet-wearing idiot until I hear his bones crack. Mirko smashed her right fist into her left palm, her eyes holding a fierce look. The humiliation she suffered at Red Hood's hands would only be rectified once she crippled the idiot. What happened the last time you encountered Red Hood? Nizu's eyes narrowed at the rabbit hero, who subconsciously stepped back. This is not a situation to save reputation. This is a situation of life or death. You and Gang Orca would not be standing here if you wanted it. Any deviation from my instructions will damage your reputation as a hero and cause me to contact the Hero Association about your constant negligence and insubordination. I will have your license suspended, Mirko. Make no mistake about that. Mirko seemed lost for words, her eyes looking to the concrete floor. TSK. With that matter solved, Nizu continued, going forward, every one of you must be near another hero once in the city. If what I speculate is correct, there will be nothing but chaos. Watch out for each other and avoid combat wherever possible. Now, Spinner, here are the documents you'll be needing. Being let down by Hound Dog, Nizu handed the villain a vanilla-colored folder. Now get moving. Endeavor and Fat Gum escort Spinner, would you? Wait. Before the group could move, Namiri spoke up, her eyes looking to the principal. Where's Aizawa? Nizu looked to the other heroes. Move out now. Per his order, the other heroes moved to leave. Walking to the rated hero, Nizu looked the woman in the eyes. He will be there. That is not something you should worry about. Namiri stared at the animal. And what should I worry about? If I were you, I would worry about keeping your composure. Otherwise, I'll be forced to take measures I otherwise wouldn't. What I said to Mirko carries on double for you. The Hero Association has already received reports about your behavior, and if I or anyone else were to bring up another, don't stop at suspension, but jump to the termination of your hero license. What occurred between you and Aizawa is something that cannot happen again. If this instability and uncooperation continue, I will. Nizu paused, seemingly finding the words. I will remove Eri from your custody. Your fight is not with me, Namiri. I'm trying to help. I understand your grief, but when it interferes with not only your well-being but the potential well-being of a child, this is something that, although I would hate to do, is something I will do. Now I suggest you get moving. Aizawa will be there, perhaps even earlier than you. It was hard the first time he read it, and even now, that remained true. Those carved words in flat stone. In memory of Izuku Midoriya, a son, a father, a friend, and the hero Deku. Aizawa stared at the gravestone that stood before him. His tired eyes scanned the words over and over again, jaw clenching the more he looked and the more he read. Fists balled at his side, scarf loosely hanging on his neck. It was hard to imagine that in a few short hours, he was going to see his student. The same student had the greatest ambition of a hero, the same student who was now a merciless vigilante. Please, Izuku. He hoped that his words would reach the boy, hoped that he could reason with his student before he reached a point where the stains could no longer be washed from his hands. If he couldn't, no, he cleared his mind before the idea could finish presenting itself. Looking at his wrist, a sigh came from his mouth. Staring at the grave one last time, his eyes fell to the side and at the grave next to Izuku's. He did not say a word and only turned, walking away from the pair. Something was wrong. That had been Red Hood's first thought as the sun rose higher and higher into the sky. The morning was still fresh, and despite this, the streets in front of the hotel gathered with numerous citizens and heroes. Many would have called him paranoid to have thought this wrong, but he knew better. His instinct screamed, but he stifled the voice for now. In the worst-case scenario, Toga's information was false, and he would have to escape and find a new way. That would be an annoyance, but not stop him entirely. Still, he sat at his sniper, eyes still focused on the Detonarat building. From the list last night, almost everyone except Tensuchi Kazoku left the building nearly 2 hours ago. Their whereabouts. He didn't know exactly, but he noticed that from the building, they had separated in several directions. Not one had left in the same direction they had walked in. The television in his room was still bursting with life when he saw it. In view of his rifle's scope, what seemed like a legion of civilians, heroes, and villains marched down the street and toward his building. Leading them was Chito's Kazuki, cameras behind her as she walked forward. Beyond that, however, caused his finger to drop towards the trigger. Spinner was at the entrance of the Detonarat building, walking through the glass doors. There was no hesitation. Taking aim, he pulled the trigger. The desk beneath him shook violently, and the window shattered with a thunderous boom. The blinds that weren't torn apart by the bullet wafted in the air wildly. He watched, waiting for the villain's head to be blown clean off his shoulders. However, nothing was ever easy when it came to them. Before his bullet could reach the monster, the glass doors of the building shattered. Rather than Spinner or anyone else, two bulking Nomas took front and center. Although his shot could tear the right arm of the left Noma, he could no longer see Spinner. Despite this, he readied his rifle again, but before he could fire again, the ringing of his room's phone caught his attention. He looked at the phone, and although he knew better, Red Hood picked up the dial. Red Hood, I presume? He didn't answer the voice's question and only set the phone down on his desk while he took aim once more. Aiming towards the top floor of the building, he clearly saw one man, Rikiya Yatsubashi. No need to answer. We see you clearly. Have you watched the TV lately? Something special should be on at this very moment. Red Hood glanced at the TV in the room. Taking up the screen was live footage of his hotel, and more specifically, the shot was zoomed in on his room's window. Very faintly could he see himself looking in the TV's direction. Yes, welcome to live TV. Since we heard of your arrival in our dear city, Ms. Chitose has been excited to interview you. I understand your reasons for being here. It's the League you want. Unfortunately, both I and the League have a mutual agreement. You see, I can't have someone who wants to live my prospective partners interfering with my dealings, and had you not hurt one of them already, I would have loved to form a business relationship with you. Red Hood heard the voice pause, and behind him, he could hear the door to his room being knocked on. However, that's no longer possible. Either way, I would like to welcome you to Daika City. Please enjoy your stay. The call went silent, and looking to the crowd, Red Hood watched the Chitose smile towards him. It wasn't even a second before the door to his room exploded. Grabbing his rifle, Red Hood jumped out the room window. The shockwave of the explosion sent him further and towards the street below. He lingered in the air for a few seconds before he crashed on the asphalt below. His rifle clattered from his hands and slid across the ground. On the floor, it didn't take long before he was surrounded on all sides. Civilians, heroes, and villains all had their quirks activated, waiting for him to move even an inch. But he paid them no mind. He couldn't not with the voice in his head screaming, "They're here." He couldn't stop it. Red Hood's body sparked with lightning, his entire body covered in the crimson-red color of full cowl. His condition was of no concern. However, as Chitose took center stage, with her cameraman focusing on Red Hood, the woman crouched near the downed vigilante. The bracelet on her wrist shimmering before it transformed into a large gauntlet. "Red Hood, I'm so happy that we finally have a chance to talk." Raising her fist, the villain struck at Red Hood's back, an explosion erupting from the gauntlet. Despite the expectation, Red Hood did not fall again, and the only mark of her attack was the light singe mark on his jacket. The woman's curiosity was further encouraged by this. "Red Hood, you know, I tried to do some digging on you, but you are a very hard man to track down. All that's known as your vendetta against the League is big enough that you would come into a city where no one is on your side. Care to answer a question? What makes you want to hunt the League so much?" Signaling the camera to get closer, Chitose looked at Red Hood. 1. Sorry, please say that again. Chitose leaned closer to Red Hood, her head tilting with a smile. "One chance. Bring the League here." Red Hood's voice came out as a low growl. Chitose paid no heed and struck Red Hood once more. Again, another explosion erupted, and Red Hood did not buckle again. "Apologies, but that isn't something I can do." Closing her eyes, Chitose shook her head, arms to her sides, smiling. When her eyes reopened, Chitose saw one last image. With his fist clenched, Red Hood uppercut the woman. The speed and power of his quirk had no restraint. The minute his right fist made contact, he could feel Chitose's jaw shatter, feel her brain rattle in her skull, and after another second passed, he could feel her warm vital fluid cover his fist. He could see it splatter across his helmet. The woman's head seemingly disintegrated, exploding into red mist. The pressure from his hit launched into the air. The crowd, numbered in the thousands, remained still, shell-shocked by what they witnessed. Her body seemed shocked, twitching before it fell back with a thud. Slowly, Red Hood stood from the floor, his body still sparking. He didn't even look at the crowd. His attention was on the Detonarat building. He was sure more than ever before that those monsters were in there. He finished Curious-sama. The group surrounding the woman yelled loudly, their eyes brimming with tears at the sight before them. The crowd shared similar looks, their faces twisting into a rage as another voice came from a nearby rooftop. Its voice echoed the crowd's cry, "My friends, do not falter. Avenge Curious' death. This villain who seeks to destroy what we have built cannot be allowed to continue." Red Hood glanced at the building. There, Koku Hanabata stood tall, his voice amplified with a device he wore as a helmet. His words were directed to the crowds. Red Hood watched as the people of the crowd grew noticeably stronger. Those with mutation quirks seemingly evolved, and those with emitters outputted more power. It was his voice that amplified the crowd's abilities. After he spoke, it wasn't long until those who were once terrified sprung into action. For Curious-sama, the closest cameraman rushed Red Hood, hands elongated, the tips of his fingers sharpening into blades. His attack spurred the others into action, their quirks ready as the more long-ranged fighters began using their quirks to attack him from a distance. It didn't matter what they were: fireballs, streams of water, ice, wind, stone, everything and anything was thrown in his direction. Red Hood reached into his jacket, hand gripping tightly over an object. Bringing it out, he pulled a single blade. Its edge gleamed brightly in the sunlight. The shape shared the same design that sat over his chest. Without a word, Red Hood charged towards the man rushing him, left hand reaching out to grasp the man's throat, choking him. Even still, the man brought down his hands to pierce the vigilante. Instead, Red Hood plunged the blade into the man's eye socket. Ignoring the scream, Red Hood, still grasping onto the man's throat, threw the man back into the group that had once surrounded Chitos. The blade in his eye beeped, a red blinking light flashing from the middle. Catching the man, one of the members grabbed the blade, ripping it from the man's eye socket, but it was too late. When it beeped once more time, the next sound was an explosion. The woman who grabbed the blade screamed similar to that of the man, her hand and most of her forearm missing, and her face burned heavily. Her screams didn't last long as they were quickly drowned out by the sound of gunfire. Pistol in right hand, Red Hood fired into the crowd indiscriminately. Hero, villain, citizen, none of it mattered. They all were in his way. His left hand dived back into his jacket and pulled out several batarangs between each of his fingers. With a flick of his arm, the batarangs flew through the air, each hitting someone or embedding themselves into the ground. After that, it took only a few seconds before rubble flew through the air, pelting Red Hood's helmet harmlessly. After the explosions were several screams, lumps of people in the crowd lost appendages, whether they were legs, arms, and/or heads. The weight of his gun's trigger got lighter each time he pulled. The recoil's impact on his arm stopped registering. His mind was solely focused in front of him. It was only a matter of time before someone reached him. Red Hood narrowed his eyes, his vision clouded by the wave of fire that had hit his helmet. As if it were rehearsed, the rest capitalized on the moment. Perhaps it was due to Koku's quirk, but the stream of water that had struck his side took him off his feet and launched him into a nearby restaurant. "Now we got you." Crashing through the windows and into the dining area, Red Hood didn't stop until his back hit the kitchen wall. After him followed a large group, all of them armed with weapons. Their arsenal varied greatly from street signs to shovels and kitchen knives. They each rushed with the intent to kill something, and Red Hood had no issue reciprocating. Holstering his pistol, Red Hood looked in his area, and a boiling pot of water sat in the kitchen. Grabbing the handle, he tossed the water into the face of the group's first member. The man screamed in pain, hands dropping the knife he held as he went to cover his face. Red Hood did not stop at the man's pain, scooping the blade from the ground with his free hand. Red Hood bashed the man's head with the pot, which dented with the first hit, caving in the man's skull. With the pot finished, he swung his arm, slicing through the small raccoon man who jumped at him with fangs aimed at his neck. His swing forced the blade, cutting the muscles that held the jaw. "You monster!" Screaming for revenge, a man clenched his fists, and from his forearms sprouted several spikes. Arms straightened entirely to the side. The man tried to launch his spike-covered knuckles through Red Hood's helmet, but he could only get so far before he found his wrist being roughly grabbed. Applying pressure, Red Hood broke the man's wrist before forcing the man to stab into his own throat. Choking on his own vital fluid, Red Hood maintained eye contact as he peered into the reflection of the man's eyes. Tilting his head, Red Hood narrowly dodged the spear aimed at him. The spearhead tore through the man's head with no issue. The spear holder who missed his mark was not forgotten. As soon as his spear had cut, Red Hood grabbed the teenager's long blonde hair before pushing downward and into the jagged edge of a chair broken by Red Hood's entrance. The edge rammed through the boy's eye and exited through the back. Lifting the body up, Red Hood held the boy's corpse and, digging into his jacket, he stuffed several grenades into the boy's shirt. Pulling the pin on the last grenade, he rushed toward the broken window, using the boy as a battering ram. Exiting the store, Red Hood could see that the store had been surrounded. This was perhaps the greatest opportunity presented to him. Corpse in hand, he tossed the body upward and towards the center of the crowd. Too much time was ticking away with these distractions, and with their quirks enhanced, they would hinder him. He needs to cut the head off the snake. Crossing his arms, Red Hood ignored how his body throbbed with pain, his quirk turning erratic as he launched his speed and power forward. He dashed into the people in front of him. Like a truck, he rammed into the large barrier formed by the MLA members. The force behind his movement was strong enough that he could audibly hear the bones in the bodies break. Following that was the complete detonation of the grenades, the 5 he had stuffed into the corpses' clothes, blowing smoke into the air, enough to cloud the vision of the villains who had been stationed on the roof nearest to Deku. Stepping onto one of the villains, he knocked to the floor, launched into the air, and jumped, smashing the villain below him nearly into a paste. The power he output liquefied the villain's organs, grinding the bones into dust. Jumping through the plume of smoke, he was undisturbed by a lack of vision or the dangers of smoke inhalation. His helmet was already filtering out what it could, and the blindness did not last long, as it only took a few seconds to exit the cloud on the other side. Once out, he could see his target as clearly as day. Deku recoiled from the explosion, hands raised defense. However, that defense was brittle. He could tell immediately that the man was better at talking than fighting, like his profession. Hands outstretched, he ignored the others sitting atop the roof. With little effort, he reached the politician, and with the man's head in his hands, Red Hood twisted until he heard a sound similar to that of a knuckle popping. Deku's head turned at an unnatural angle, and beneath the skin of his neck, a fragment of his spinal cord poked from underneath. Letting go of the man, he took off once more, launching into the air and breaking the roof below him. The streets below were filled with members of this godforsaken city's army. Despite the distance between him and the ground being large, the fanatical monsters continued to assault him from ground level. Those who could launch themselves in the air with their quirks, those who could fly, each and every one of them pursued him. In response, Red Hood rained down bullets from above, his entire being put towards the purpose of closing the distance between him and the building that housed the League. He had no time to aim. He just pulled the trigger, and whether the shots landed or not failed to matter. If he got there now, he could end this. That had been the plan. However, Red Hood was forced back. Appearing before him was a man who stood atop a pillar of ice. Their entire body was covered by a thick winter parka face obscured by the white fur-lined hood. Arm outstretched, the villain clenched his fist. Attacking from Red Hood's side, a giant dragon made of ice trapped him within its jaws, crashing him through several buildings as the distance between him and the Detonarat building grew. The pistol that he raised to fire at the villain fell from his hand, the pain in his body forcing him to lose his grip. Even with OFA, the damage that piled up couldn't be ignored. In fact, with his quirk activated, the impacts against his body were only amplified. He had forgotten it initially, but the fatigue in his body was steadily growing, and the tearing of his ligaments couldn't be blocked out entirely. I can't allow you to go any further. With the clenching of his fist, the man controlling the dragon forced the creation to tighten its jaw. The ice dragon continued to bite on his torso, tearing a few holes into his leather jacket. Although they weren't sharp enough to go through his armor, they still caused pain to shoot through his body. Even more than the pain, what grew larger was the anger that burned through his blood. Your quirk is strong, and there is no doubt how formidable you are, but this is as far as your effort can amount to. I have been training my abilities longer than the heroes since they manifested. Now, I ask you to die here in the name of our supreme leader. Holding the vigilante down, the villain allowed several people to join the fray. The odd thing was that each person that joined looked similar. Each one of them were who looked to be Red Hood. Their attire is almost an exact copy of his. From within the dragon's grasp, Red Hood was forced to endure the onslaught of attacks that followed. Kicking, punching, whatever the clones could do they did. More specifically, he could feel their attempts to snap his neck. Their hands grasped his head and neck, trying with all their might to break his bones. Bones that had started to rattle from within his body. He was tired of these annoyances that continued to get in the way of his justice. Who got in the way of him rending the flesh and skin from the members of the League. Red Hood clenched his fist. There was nothing to stop him as he shot his hand forward. During the final exams of his first year, All Might, with a weakened punch, was able to almost level several blocks. Now, he would do what All Might did, although now he had no restraint. It was like a cyclone had struck. Although his fist destroyed the dragon holding him, the wind did everything after. The wind from his fist tore through glass, concrete, and asphalt. There was nothing in its path that could escape. The army that was in the path of his punch wasn't spared. Any that weren't buried by the rubble had their skin stripped off their muscles. If that wasn't the case, the shards of glass or concrete that shot at extreme speeds tore bodies in half, sliced off limbs, crushed bone, and pulverized organs. As for the clones of him, well, they were destroyed in an instant. Such unrestrained power did not come without repercussions. However, freed from the villain's capture, Red Hood stood with his left hand grasping his shoulder. His arm hung loosely at his side. His glove and right sleeve up to his elbow were torn to shreds. The armor of his forearm was crushed, pieces stuck in his dark purple skin, and his helmet was not spared either. Over his right eye, a large crack had formed due to the shockwave. Even worse was the jagged edge of bone that broke through the muscles and flesh of his forearm. The pain was intense, far lower than one would imagine. The open fracture leaked of vital fluid. One would have thought this over. With one arm crippled, there was no chance that he could win the fights ahead. However, giving up was not something that he could do. With his left hand, Red Hood grasped the bone before he jammed it back through the flesh. Setting the bone in place, he shuffled forward while his body pleaded for him to stop, but that wasn't possible. His eyes traveled through the area, and before him was the villain partly responsible for his condition. This monster had caught him off guard, and as with the other two, he figured that this person was essential to Rakia. They were at least important enough to be one of the last defenses. Red Hood continued his walk to the downed villain until the warmth of his quirk disappeared instantly. "Remember me, idiot?" Those words were all he heard before his vision blurred. The leg strength strong enough to destroy steel was not something easily forgotten. Without OFA supporting him, Red Hood was knocked into the nearest building. The right eye of his helmet shattered into pieces. Red Hood was subjected to flames hot enough to incinerate most people without a moment's rest. Raising his wounded arm, Red Hood protected his eye in doing so. However, his bare arm was sacrificed in the process. His open wound was forcefully cauterized, a burning smell wafting through the air. His abdominal and chest armor started to melt under the heat as well. While it was resistant, his armor wasn't fireproof. The visor of his helmet glitched, and soon his eardrums threatened to burst. There were two different waves of sound hitting him. His brain rattled within his skull, his wounds piled on top of each other. Soon, his only sense of relief came from the constant attack stopping. Slumping against the rubble he had been launched into, Red Hood lay motionless. Ectoplasm, Ryukyu, Vlad King. Secure the area. Snipe and Samantas, retrieve him. Aizawa's voice spoke with authority, his fellow heroes listening to his command. His hair fell as his quirk deactivated. Snipe and Samantas hoisted the vigilante by the arms, carrying the downed man towards the group. Aizawa watched as they dragged Red Hood to him, his jaw clenching at the sight before him. Finally, from his side, Namiri spoke. Although Red Hood wasn't a League member, the man was bound to have any information that Toga may have shared. Now that they had him and Spinner on the inside, they could finally bring the League down. Aizawa, however, only continued to stare at the vigilante. Don't underestimate him. This asswipe couldn't even take a single hit. Mirko's grin remained wide as Snipe and Samantas held him. Let's unmask this cursed head. The rabbit hero stood before the vigilante, hands going to grab the man's helmet. Her body blocked Aizawa's view. It was that moment of blindness that proved catastrophic. It was too fast to even understand what had occurred. A cloud of smoke erupted large enough to cover the entire immediate area. Then the pained yells of Snipe, Cementos, and Mirko tore through the air. Wafting the smoke from his face, Aizawa covered his mouth with his scarf. Mike. With a yell, Aizawa covered his ears as Present Mike yelled, his sound wave ridding the area of smoke. Once it was clear, Aizawa saw the damage done firsthand. Crouched on the floor was Mirko, nose broken, her left leg mangled while her right ear leaked of vital fluid, its top half laying flat on the floor having been sliced clean off. Cementos's left arm, broken off to the shoulder and embedded in Snipe's abdomen, was the same knife Red Hood used. Putting a hand to his ear, Aizawa yelled, "Everyone report back, we have injured. Red Hood has escaped custody." Aizawa's eyes scanned the streets before his eyes landed on what seemed to be Red Hood's single objective. Get them to their feet. It's time we leave. We've lost this fight. But what about now? Aizawa yelled at Midnight. It was obvious what the hero wanted to do. However, now was not the time. At least it wasn't for her. Before another word could be spoken, Aizawa ran towards the Detnarat building. As he ran, Nizu's voice came from his earpiece. "Aizawa, you need to leave the city now. There's massive activity in the forest east of Daika City. It's headed directly towards you." Aizawa didn't stop. Instead, he plucked his earpiece out before he tossed it aside. His pace only quickened. Red Hood stumbled forward and through the shattered glass door of the Detnarat building, his eyes squinting as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. Endeavor's flame did more damage than he initially thought. His left eye's vision glitched, and the internal wiring of his helmet was partly melted on the inside. He kept walking with half his vision destroyed. The lobby was utterly devoid of life. No reception, no heroes, nobody. Going forward, Red Hood only stopped when the building came to life with a single voice over the loudspeaker. "Quite impressive, Red Hood. Your unrelenting brutality and perseverance to complete your goals are to be commended. As such, you deserve a reward for that same persistence." Red Hood held his arm, watching elevator doors open behind the reception desk. Stumbling forward, Red Hood stepped inside the elevator, and once inside, he leaned against the nearest wall. His entire body throbbed while his arm burned. His armor was hanging on by a thread, and most of the metal plates melted into each other. His leather jacket burnt to a crisp by Endeavor's flame. Little of his original gear remained in working order. All he had left was one pistol with a single loaded magazine, his other knife, and one last smoke bomb. Coughing, Red Hood tried to breathe, his chest rising and falling with great effort. The smoke that entered his lungs suffocated him. Exploding a smoke pellet in your mouth wasn't the smartest thing to do, but that had been his only option. Looking at the number display inside the elevator, he watched as the number climbed from floor to floor, getting higher and higher before it reached the final level. With a ding, the elevator doors opened. Walking out of the elevator, Red Hood was temporarily blinded by sunlight before his eyes quickly adjusted. Before him, he saw his reward, standing alone in the room surrounded by clones. Twice glared at the vigilante. Reaching his side, he unholstered his pistol. There was no exchange of dialogue. Instead, he opened fire at the clones, who immediately began to rush towards him. "You killed Toga?" The clones yelled in sync as they rushed towards him, brandishing their measuring tape weapons. Each clone lashed their tape at Red Hood, who didn't stop his rush forward. His bullets only fired in a single direction, clearing any that were directly in front of him. As for the ones that attacked at his side, he ignored them, even when their measuring tape slashed at his body. He could feel it when the tape sliced into his arm and when they chipped away at the remaining armor plates. "I'll unalive you. We'll tear you limb from limb." For Toga. The clones kept yelling as they continued attacking, but Red Hood holstered his empty weapon before he unsheathed his knife. Holding the blade with a reverse grip, he sliced through the clones that grabbed him. Even after they turned to mud, he kept swinging. He didn't stop when he felt his right arm being cut by the tape or when his body begged for him to rest. He only stopped when he reached the end of the clone pile. At the back was Twice, who continued to summon clones. Honing in on the villain, Red Hood raised his knife, plunging the blade into the man's shoulder blade. Twice screaming in pain as Red Hood tackled him to the ground, yet the vigilante didn't stop. Taking the knife out, he again plunged the blade into the other arm. Letting go, Red Hood grasped at Twice's mask. The man struggled, his clones wrapping several tape measures over Red Hood's neck, tightening. The steel edge dug into the material covering his neck, and the 5 twice clones choking him pulled with all their weight. Even with some of their original strength having been weakened by being clones, the edge buried themselves deep, cutting into his neck. Even still, Red Hood did not relent. Unmasking the original twice, he grabbed the villain's head. His body sparking to life with OFA resisted the clones, pulling his head forward and allowing the tape measures to go deeper. With his right eye watching Twice's face, he placed both thumbs on the scar on the villain's forehead. His thumbs put pressure on the old wound. "Oh!" Twice screamed in pain as his other clones rushed to stop Red Hood by any means possible. They tried to pull the vigilante off with their tape measures, but their efforts were fruitless. With his quirk, he ignored every attempt as he wedged his fingers between Twice's skin, ripping apart the weakened flesh with his hands. Fingers dug until he was able to feel Twice's skull. The man screamed loudly, his wails overpowering the squelching noise of his skin being forced open. "I'm splitting." The villain yelled loudly as Red Hood pushed down onto the man with his total weight. With the strengthening of OFA, there was little resistance when his fingers broke through the bone. The Twice clones began to falter, many falling apart as the man's legs kicked wildly. His flailing legs kicked against the floor. The tape measures that had once threatened to behead him fell weightlessly. Twice's hands grabbed at Red Hood's helmet. His hands wiped themselves against the smog-covered helmet. "I'll..." He tried to speak, but Red Hood didn't let him. He only pushed his thumbs further until he felt the jello-like squish of Twice's brain. His thumbs were soaked in hot liquid. He didn't say a word. His right eye narrowed into a point, his eye leaking tears as he pushed further. Hands grasping, he pulled apart, splitting the villain's head apart. Freeing his hands, he couldn't stop, his right hand grabbing the knife as he plunged the blade into Twice's chest over and over again. His quirk failed to disappear. The strength of his thrust stabbed through bone. He continued to stab until he reached the point that his blade snapped from the handle. Red Hood's armor was covered in stains. Some of the liquid even entered his fractured helmet. Slumping over Twice's corpse, Red Hood looked out the window. Although his eyesight was blurry from the blow he received from Mirko, he could see the forest north of the city trembling, trees falling over as panicked birds flew through the sky. The floor beneath him shook, similar to a 6-magnitude earthquake. Focusing, he could see a hulking figure running in his direction. The body was massive, and its skin was covered in rocks. The buildings it ran into on the city's edge were no match. With a pained groan, he stood up, legs buckling as he stumbled. There wasn't a way he could fight the behemoth as he was. He doubted anyone could as of now. As a testament to this fact, the dragon hero Ryukyu flew into the sky, carrying on her back the hero group who had ambushed him. "Gotta." Raising his left fist, he put nearly his full strength into his punch. His attack broke through the 60 levels that comprised the entire building. From his position, he could barely see the lobby floor. Crawling, he fell down the levels in their entirety, the strength of his body faltering as he crashed onto the lobby floor. Gah! His body tensed tightly, his fists balling as he lay on the ground. The thundering footsteps of the behemoth were growing closer. Turning over on his stomach, Red Hood crawled towards the lobby's bathroom, his stained hands prints increasing in distance to each other. Red Hood continued to crawl forward, but as he did, he could faintly hear the destruction of buildings just outside. He wouldn't make it at the rate he was moving until he felt a hand grab his arm. Looking to his side, Red Hood could see Aizawa, the man hoisting his arm over his shoulder. Supporting his weight, Aizawa carried the vigilante to the bathroom. Entering, Red Hood wasted no time, freeing himself from Aizawa's grip. Raising his left fist, he only hoped he was correct. Smashing downward, he burst through the several pipelines underneath the concrete. Even further than that was the sewer line that all the waste flushed into. Grabbing the hero, Red Hood dropped through the hole as the footsteps finally neared close enough that the building began to crumble. Their bones shook as the pair splashed into the sewer water below, the walls around them rumbling, stone falling from the walls and ceiling as though the entire tunnel was soon to collapse. All noise only drowned out by the rough coughing of Red Hood. Spilling from underneath the chin, fluid dripped into the water below as the vigilante crawled towards the wall, shaking off Aizawa's loose hand and the rubble that had almost buried him. body trembling with each movement. The pain had begun to take hold, vision spinning as strength slowly drained from his limbs. Yet he couldn't pass out. He knew if he did. Placing his right hand against the concrete floor, his arm slipped from underneath, sending his already shattered helmet into the ground. His arm, wrist, even fingers were broken. Still, he found enough of a hold to prop himself up. He crawled until he set his back against the wall, trying to ignore the discomfort that came from the shaking walls. The vigilante watched as across from him, Aizawa took a similar position, albeit his condition was far better than his. The two sat in silence, alone, unconcealed. Emerald Eye looking into the hero's almost pitch-black eyes. No words were exchanged, as they took in each other's appearance. Not that there wasn't much to see. His armor was torn to shreds, helmet broken, his body covered in open wounds as he dripped with fresh vital fluid. As for Aizawa, well, there wasn't a story to tell. Other than a few scratches, the man looked relatively fine. For 10 minutes, neither spoke and only listened to the raging monster just a few feet above their heads. Finally, the silence was broken. Take off the helmet. Red Hood could only stare. This wasn't Aizawa asking, but demanding him. The hero's voice carried a tone of desperation, of anger, sadness, and hope. Kicking his legs to brace himself against the wall, Red Hood leaned forward, left hand aching to reach towards the back of his head. Pressing a button, the vigilante had torn his helmet off. Hair wet with sweat, Izuku looked to his mentor. The man had no idea what to do with his hands. Fists and jaw clenching and unclenching. Hands and arms moving to his mouth, head, body, never settling into a single place. Aizawa's head drowned in thoughts. He had wished he had been wrong, wished in some way that this truth was false. But he out of everyone knew better than to wish for something that could never be. Izuku watched in silence, his own jaw clenched so tight the bones in his jaw started to hurt. Part of him screamed to close his eyes, but he couldn't, especially when Aizawa rose from his side of the tunnel, rapidly grabbing him by the collar, slamming his back into the wall. Why? Why Izuku? The hero had screamed. The amount of times he let his emotions get the better of him was growing each day, but none of them can be close to this. Why? Why didn't you come back? Why would you do this? To me, to Eri. He wanted an answer, even if he had to pry it from his student's lips. Aizawa would not relent. Holding Izuku's collar tightly, the man started to shake the injured boy. The silence that persisted from Izuku only gave rise to an even greater anger. Say something, he yelled, pleaded, wanting some answer, anything but silence. Please, Izuku, come back. The entire time Izuku did not look away. His body ached from the harsh movement. Mouth slowly opening, he finally spoke. Come back? I do that, then how long? His question went without answer. His body surging with full cowl, Izuku pushed back, his own hands grabbing tightly onto Aizawa's clothes as he pushed both himself and the hero into the other wall. How long, Aizawa? Aizawa for a moment was in stunned silence, waiting as Izuku's eyes bored holes through his skull. How long would it take them? If they knew I was alive, how long before they get Eri, Namuri, or even you? How could I go back knowing that those monsters out here would do anything to hurt me? Out here I can stop them. I can save her. He understood. Perhaps he was the only one that could. Aizawa's jaw tightened, although he knew that in some way Izuku may be right. Looking at the boy now told him a different story. Eyes filled with fatigue, body barely hanging on with what little strength was left. This. Although Izuku was alive, could anyone really call this living? Like this? By finishing everyone who gets in your way. Izuku, you can stop this. You don't need to do this. Please come back. It was an honest plea, one that made Izuku's grip falter, until we can stop the League another way. Another way. Izuku's grip regained its strength. Other way. The silence had remained for what seemed like hours. This was one of the few times that the pain had stopped, one of the few times the League were not here. His busted lip dripped fresh with crimson fluid. His body ached and quivered uncontrollably. The discomfort was worse than the pain, the feeling as though his skin were not his own. Strength failing him with each moment. Strapped to his chair, he could do nothing but sit and wait. Trying to move was useless. If he did, the barbed wire would cut through his skin and they would know he tried, making the punishment even worse. Izuku, a voice called out from the darkness. The pain wrenching his heart each time he heard it. Head raising, he tried to see through his hazy vision, the image of his mother. Her body broken and stained, yet despite that a gentle smile sat on her face. Like him, her movements were restricted, rope holding all her limbs together. Despite that, as if trying to inch closer to him, she moved her body slowly. Her eyes were filled with concern, not with regard to herself, but to him and only him. No matter what they did to her, she still smiled, still cried when she saw them hurt him. How? He asked himself that question so many times. How could she smile like that, like she always did, especially at him? Why would she cry for him? He was the one who got her into this mess. If he had kept his head down, didn't try and be a hero, she wouldn't be here. He wouldn't have met All Might, gotten involved with the League. But if he didn't, Eri, he wasn't sure what would have happened to her. He missed her, yet was glad she wasn't here. Every time the League came through the warehouse doors, he feared that it would be the day when they brought in Eri. They always threatened to do so. Izuku, it's okay. He felt a tap on his foot, cheek brushing up against his broken leg. Inko tried to give him some sort of comfort. She was still trying to soothe his pain, gently rubbing her head against him. He could only lower his head, eyes closing, tearing leaking. I'm sorry. He kept repeating, fists clenching onto the armrests of his chair. His body leaning forward, letting the barbed wire cut into his abdomen and chest as he hunched over. It's okay. It's okay. Responding to her words, Inko rested her head onto him. Her voice, although hoarse from crying, still holding the warmth he had grown up with. At her words, Izuku's tears increased. All because of him, she was humiliated, tortured, hurt. And even worse, she didn't hate him for it. He wished she did. That way, maybe some way they would let her go, somehow be convinced that she didn't care for him, that him being hurt wouldn't matter. Slam. The door to warehouse opened, and through it came those responsible, and of course the first to rush over was Himiko Toga, the crazed girl holding a large smile as she ran towards him. Grabbing onto his head, she raised his eyes up, and with a sick smile spoke. Aiza, did you miss me? Eyes going past Toga, Izuku looked each League member in the face. Their smiles as they looked towards him, and Inko told him everything. There was no convincing these monsters. No saving them. No locking them up. There is no other way. Izuku threw Aizawa to the floor, pushing his entire body onto the hero. On the ground, Izuku continued to yell, "You don't know what they did. What they did to her. All because of me. If it was only me in that warehouse. If it was only me who was tortured, nothing else would have mattered. I could have died knowing that my mother would still be alive. That Eri would still have a family. Those monsters took everything. She didn't deserve the humiliation. The pain." Standing, Izuku pulled his pistol, aiming it at the teacher's head. "Without me, Eri is safe. Everyone is safe." Izuku Midoriya, Deku, couldn't save Inko Midoriya or himself. He failed. "I won't. Not anymore. I'll not spare anyone who tries to hurt her." Izuku. Through gritted teeth, Aizawa stared down the barrel of Red Hood's pistol. His student was gone. The two fell silent. Red Hood's rapid breathing barely slowing as the gun shook in his hand. There was little he could say. "I'm sorry." He apologized for not saving him, saving Inko, for not being there. His words caused Red Hood's gun to lower before the vigilante tossed the weapon into Aizawa's lap. "I won't quit until each of them are dead by my hands. If you want to stop me so badly." The rest went unsaid, and Aizawa's hand gripped the pistol. Aiming at the hero, knew that Red Hood already made up his mind and would stick to his word no matter what. That was the kind of person he always was. Hand shaking, Aizawa watched as Red Hood turned and with a limp walked down the tunnel. Aizawa's ears rang with the splashing of water as the vigilante slowly inched further and further away. Right index finger holding the trigger, Aizawa could only give a light pull before he lowered the gun entirely. He could only listen as the splashes increased in distance before fading entirely. Lowering his head, Aizawa's gaze turned towards the broken helmet next to him, mocking him as it stared back. He rose to his feet, grabbing the gear before he tucked Red Hood's pistol into his costume. A decision would have to be made. It was getting harder to walk with each passing moment. His feet swayed unsteadily. His vision had gone almost completely blurry. He could hardly see past his nose in the darkness of the tunnels he found himself walking in. The water combined with his vital fluid caused his body to shiver. The injuries were numerous and each stacked the pain. The broken ankle he walked on barely supporting his weight, and eventually he found himself falling. face splashing in the sewage below, he nearly suffocated, finding it hard to find some sort of footing. Exhaustion struck him, and what little armor he wore had started to weigh down on him. With great effort, he began to peel the pieces away, though that was harder than how it sounded. Endeavor's flames had melted the many pieces into one, his chest plate almost meshing with his skin, while broken shards were embedded deep within his flesh. First he started off small: gloves, boots, holsters. Then with OFA he ripped the armor, almost his skin completely off his chest. The vital fluid that spilled continued to pool around him as he placed each and every piece into a small pile. Digging into one of the remaining compartments of his suit, he spread a foul-smelling liquid over the apparel. With a small strike against a nearby wall, a small flame flickered to life. Tossing the small fire onto the gear, he watched it go up in flames. Naked, he continued to stumble down the sewers for what seemed like hours. Falling, rising, only to fall again, over and over, repeating the same process. He could not mend his broken bones or clamp shut the open wounds. He bled. He groaned, all while his head pounded. He kept walking as vomit spilled from his mouth and down his body. There was no stopping, no resting. As soon as he was able, his hunt would continue. The disaster of Deku City, it was all anyone on the streets would talk about. As he jumped from rooftop to rooftop and passed citizens on their phones who watched the news with widened eyes, he could only focus on the helmet held within his grip. The stench that wafted from his clothes failed to register. In his ears he could hear what was being said. Red Hood was in Deku City? Oh my god, how many peoples did he took? It seemed like the narrative was already spun. His and the other heroes' involvement completely unnoticed, and if he was right, then not only did Nizu and the Hero Association, but the villains in control of Deku City had spun the narrative of Red Hood's unprovoked massacre. In a city that was known for their low crime rates, the citizens were sure that Red Hood slaughtered innocent people. He could understand it. It was better for the public to not know of the corruption that resided within Hero Society, or that trusted officials were actually cold-blooded villains. That doesn't make it right. His grip on the helmet grew stronger. The yells of Red Hood played over and over in his head. His stew. No, he couldn't call him that anymore. Red Hood was trying to correct the mistakes of Izuku. Trying to be a hero, just not in the way he should. To see his body mangled like that was hard, even harder after he knew who it was. His anger rose with each thought. Each time he remembered the look Red Hood held, one filled with vengeance, justice, and hatred. Was there any way he could bring Izuku back? Or was he doomed to? When the sights of U.A came into view, all thoughts quieted themselves as he entered the campus. He already assumed the injured were taken to Recovery Girl. Although it was quick, the damage Red Hood had done was great, and it could have been worse, that he was sure of. Entering the campus, Aizawa walked towards the entrance of the main building. He needed some time to think. He couldn't do it here. His office was the only real option, though that oasis was far away when he opened the doors. There, as if waiting for him, were most of the team that either had light injuries or none at all. Fat Gum, Gang Orca, Present Mike, Snipe, and Midnight. The rest were with the injured or had reported to their agencies. Their eyes all fell towards him. However, Midnight's eyes fell squarely on the helmet he held. Aizawa, your communications shut off. We were worried. Present Mike was the first to speak up. Although the words that came from his mouth were genuine in their concern, suspicion, anger, all of it was packed behind the tone his friend carried. The communicators they were given were specifically designed to not shut off. Not just that, but to track their location the entire time. The only reason Aizawa wasn't tracked or heard was because of one simple reason. He abandoned the communicator. They all knew this. What happened? Fat Gum crossed his arms, his form slightly deflated as light scratches were seen across his face. Although he wasn't close colleagues with Aizawa, he knew the man was logical. So for what reason did he abandon the evacuation? And not only that, but... Fat Gum looked to the helmet. The silence was short, but it was enough for the atmosphere to get heavy. Opening his mouth, Aizawa spoke, his tone flat, snuffing any emotion that could have come out, or at least most of it. After Red Hood escaped from custody, I gave chase. He was injured. I thought I could catch up. I lost him in the city and couldn't have Ryukyu stall for time with that monster rampaging towards us. I had an idea of where Red Hood was headed, and I went. I came to the location, but was too late. All I found was his helmet. My communicator must have fallen out as I tried to catch up, Either it was then or when the monster almost collapsed the building on top of me. I escaped through the sewers, and eventually after waiting, I got out. His deadpan tone was enough to convince those who had only worked with him a few times. Both Gang Orca and Fat Gum believed. Considering the circumstances and how Red Hood escaped, there was little doubt that what Aizawa said was true. Those close, however, could tell it was off. The story was perfect, but present Mike, Midnight, and Snipe could see the way the man's body trembled slightly, and how his grip on Red Hood's helmet grew tighter with each word. None would call it, however. There was more important things to worry about. I see. Gang Orca nodded at the hero's words. What of the helmet? It's possible some DNA was left behind. Aizawa's jaw clenched. As soon as the situation is figured out, I'll turn it over to Hound Dog and Nizu, hopefully get a forensics team to look. Until then, I'll hold on to it. Again, the reason was good enough, and so they let go of it. The atmosphere grew silent once more before Aizawa spoke. I'll be in my office. The heroes nodded, all except Midnight, the woman's eyes narrowing slightly. As soon as Aizawa had begun walking away, she followed, and she continued to do so until Aizawa reached the door to his office. Hand placed on the handle, he drew in a large breath. Midnight. Namuri bit her lip, the frustration, the anger of failing, it all built in her chest like a storm. She failed to get information from Toga, failed to get information from Spinner. She even failed in stopping Red Hood. She hated it, hated this. Powerlessness. It's so similar to how she felt when she watched the League torture Izuku. She could do nothing but blabber and cry. Even now, for every villain she chased down or pursued, she never got any closer, but she could tell that Aizawa of all people had what she wanted. The rage she felt towards him subsided. The memory of their last one-on-one encounter had ended with nothing gained. Aizawa, can we talk? Her tone was light, but still carried enough of an edge to tell Aizawa that no matter what he said, she wouldn't take no for an answer. Aizawa tore his eyes away from Namuri, instead focusing on the door ahead. His head ran silent. What could he say? If he lied, Namuri would know. If he told the truth, he hadn't even made his own choice. All he had was a question, not a should he, or would he. But could he even pull the trigger? Could he still bring back Izuku? Come in. His place of rebirth was where he found himself again. The start of what he is and what he has become. Staring at the toxic green water that bubbled unnaturally, breaking the silence, he tightened his jaw. The pain that pulsed throughout his body, keeping his bloodshot eyes open. With his hands, he ripped out the embedded shards of his armor, allowing his vital fluid to flow freely. Chest, legs, arms each had segments of metal removed without mercy. He had no time to carefully pluck out the material. With a small step, he began to submerge his body into the water. His bruised skin being covered centimeter by centimeter, inch by inch, all until he leaned downward. He did not take a breath as he plunged his head in the liquid below. All the air in his lungs escaping. The bubbles formed, joining those above as he drowned himself. He stood tall, movements slowed as though he were trapped in a bottomless ocean. Armor encasing him, helmet tightly affixed to his head, eyes staring in a single direction. 3 stained chairs that sat in front of him. Although bags concealed the soaked figures, he could tell who they were. Still, he could not take a step forward. Anchored in place. OFA not activating, gun not raising, and eyes unblinking. Bags torn off their heads, only confirming their identities. Their bodies mangled beyond recognition, arms twisted in unhuman angles, skin decayed, their eyes all pleading. But none more so than hers. Save me. They screamed through the gags placed inside their mouths. Muffled, painful screams echoing in his ears. He could not turn his head or block the sound. He could only watch as they wailed. Izuku, help us. Please. Papa, help me. They all screamed, tears welling in his eyes. Arms not responding to his command, shaking as he exerted all the strength he could. Something would not allow him to reach outward. He could not comfort the stained face of his daughter, hold the woman who he had longed for, or usher his true mentor onto their feet. Voice failing to escape his mouth. Shu, Spinner, Shigaraki, Dabi, Compress, Hirojiri. All of them. Standing behind the chairs with Shigaraki, shushing the 3 with a finger on his mouth. His raspy voice was one that he could never forget. Reaching for his gun, he tried with all his might to stop the scene that had began to play out before him. They did not hesitate. Aizawa was the first to scream in pain. his face being peeled off with the small slender blade, held in the tight grip of Spinner. The villain slowly sawing the skin, the muscle of his mentor's face. The teacher, the hero, could not stop screaming. He watched as Spinner carved deeper and deeper, vital fluid gushing from the wound, the sinewy muscle fibers exposing themselves, a sadistic display. His hand had barely reached the handle of his gun when Aizawa's scream was joined by Namuri's. The hero, he was forced to watch as they recreated the horror they subjected his mother to. Her refusal only apparent in the desperate struggles to escape from the grip compress and Dabi held on her. Her tear-filled eyes never leaving his as they violated her. His arm raised, still far too low to get a clean shot. Still too slow to stop Shigaraki from approaching Eri. The child's snow-white hair dirted, face bruised, all while parts of her skin decayed away, blowing in the non-existent wind. From behind Shigaraki's hands placed on the girl's arms, fingers slowly eating away at her flesh. Body thrashing violently. "Papa! Papa, it hurts! Papa!" She screamed so loudly, eardrums threatening to burst. His gun had raised. He aimed, fingers squeezing the trigger. Click, click, click. 3 empty clicks, no round chambered. His gun was empty. A laugh came from Shigaraki, the monster, cackling with glee. He continued to pull the trigger, trying in vain to stop Shigaraki's hands from coiling around Eri's neck, to stop the violation of Namuri, to stop Aizawa's torture, but he failed. Eyes capturing Eri's broken outstretched hand reaching to him. "Papa?" A large gasp erupted from his mouth, water splashing violently as his body raised. He turned, head looking in every direction, pupils shrinking, the white of his eyes bloodshot. His chest heaved, exhales and inhales sharp, the air that passed through his lungs doing anything but calming his rapidly thumping heart. He moved, rushing from the water, his naked form crashing against the rocky wall, hands finding a place of rest. Teeth grinding while he felt the touch of his fingertips against solid rock. Mind trying to piece reality together. He could still see their faces. He traced the rock, hoping to ground himself to something physical. Although powerful, the Lazarus Pit was an invitation to hell. He had experienced it before, but not like this. He first only relived the moment of his death. He did not see the nightmare that was his future. Raising his right fist, he smashed it against the wall, breaking a solid piece of rock with ease, his knuckles hardly collecting dust. His body had gotten stronger, but he could not recognize this. He only screamed, "No, that can't happen." He wouldn't let the visions come true. He held his head, shaking violently, eyes peeking through the gaps of his fingers. He had to stop it, no matter what. The thought never left his head. His once broken body mended to perfect condition, his wounds closed, leaving nothing behind. Even his oldest scars had all but faded, merely a shadow of what once was. Standing he walked, head in his hands as he stumbled down the nearest tunnel. His steps slowly straightening, growing heavier, the water of the Lazarus Pit drying further with each step taken. Time was wasting. He could not sit still. Once again he must burn them from their holes, tear them apart with his hands. Only then would they be safe. His hands left his head, the metal doors, old. Familiar. Exactly where he needed to be. Gear and weapons were gone. He needed new ones. Pushing the large doors open, he watched the bunker flicker to life. The fluorescent lights shining brightly. Taking a moment to adjust, he scanned the room, eyes falling on the armory, its doors still as he left it. Metal slightly bent with the door ajar, crowbar placed to the side. He moved, making his way inside the room, unflinching at the bright lights that flashed. His concern was focused on the displays ahead of him. He had seen it once, and that had been when he had first taken the mantle of Red Hood. Since then he hadn't stepped inside. Some part of him still marveled at the technology displayed, but the time to be amazed was non-existent. He had to get back out as soon as he could, find out what the League were up to. Find Shigaraki. Putting on one of the few compression suits available, he looked throughout the room. His eyes danced from suit to suit, all air sealed into their own displays. Many were altered, copies of his former suit, others different in almost every regard. However, only one fit his needs. Placing his left hand on the glass, he readied himself. The biometric security shut him out from accessing what had now belonged to him. Full cowl coated his body, right fist clenching as he shattered the thick glass. The alarms the display case featured blaring to life. He ignored all sound. He only reached for his new equipment, a style reminiscent of a high-tech military uniform. The lower abdomen and legs designed with a look similar to that of red digital camouflage. Holsters, pouches, and the straps that held them incorporated into the material itself. Gauntlets, shin, bicep, shoulder, and chest armor, made of interlocking metal plates, highly flexible, and as he placed himself inside, he actively felt the suit adjust to match him. He watched the armor shimmer with a blue hue, the color slowly bleeding as in the center formed his symbol. He clenched his fists, full cowl still coating his body. The suit was an improvement over the last by a large degree. Now, however, came the piece most essential, the one item that kept the monsters at bay. The helmet in his hands reacting to his touch, the display itself breathing, alive. Placing the helmet on, his body had finally felt like his own. I won't let it happen. Come in. Aizawa's tone, his movements, his face. Namuri could see it as clear as day. The same expression she had often traced mirror when alone. A crushing, suffocating defeat, a sadness. Ever since it had began they had changed. That much was unavoidable, whether they had liked it or not. Izuku had a place in both their hearts. His kidnapping, torture, alleged death, still affected them. This, however, was something more, at least to Aizawa. She watched her friend gesture to the seats in the office. It had been a while since she had been in here. It was dirted, dust collecting on the floor, boxes full of files littering the ground. Still she took the offer, sitting quietly. The decision had already been made. There would be no anger towards him, so long as he told her what he knew, what she wanted to know, what she must know. With a clatter her attention was brought towards the cracked helmet Aizawa placed on the desk, though that was overshadowed by the next item. A pistol, the same Jericho 941 used so many times by Red Hood, a weapon that no matter which file, from debut to current, was the vigilante's weapon of choice. Seeing the weapon only caused more questions to be raised, but she would stifle them for now, especially at the voice of Aizawa. What is it? The man's tired eyes never left the helmet. His question, although crude, had opened the conversation. A deep inhale. Toga, Spinner, Naomesa. You talked to all of them. Stop me from listening to what any of them said. Even when it was about Izuku. You went out of your way to protect the villains who hurt him. I just want to know why. Tears had welled up in Namuri's eyes. When she remembered all the times she could have learned something only for Aizawa to interrupt, rage built. A rage she could only express in tears. What did they say about Izuku? Please, I need to know. Her voice faded, and the silence after was deafening. Namuri watched as Aizawa's hands reached to his face, arms shaking, perhaps for the very first time. His eyes quickly filling with tears. She could hardly believe it, seeing tears drip from his face and onto the desk below. It took a moment for Aizawa to speak, jaw tightening. Izuku isn't dead. That sentence alone was enough to make Namuri's breath hitch. The tears barely contained spilling out as her body curled into her stomach. A small smile coming across her face, hand going to cover her whimpering mouth. The elation was too much. She had to tell Eri. The League doesn't have him. There was a pause, the joy she felt quickly fading. Where could he be if not with them? Where? What? Aizawa's hands fell, holding the sides of Red Hood's helmet. After Toga's interrogation, I met Naomesa to confirm her responses to my questions. You know that I asked her if Izuku was alive, where he was. Nothing that she said was registered as a lie or the truth. She didn't know. Spinner, his story matched with Toga's, he didn't know either. When I fought Red Hood, I had a feeling that he was so familiar. I had suspected it, just after I spoke to Naomesa. Namuri could only let him talk, her heart beating faster with each word. Despite what people thought, she was quick to understand, her lip quivering. Hey Aizawa, what are you saying? I watched our class's practices, analyzed his motives, his fighting, his quirk, everything. God, everything made sense. I hoped, Namuri, hoped to God that it wasn't true, that it couldn't be him. Please anyone but him. His tears increased. In Daika City, I had to make sure. I saw Izuku. Namuri, I saw him. Aizawa, if you're just saying this to piss me off, you better stop. Namuri raised her voice, standing from her seat, slamming her fists against Aizawa's desk. It couldn't be true. Not Izuku. Not him. I couldn't tell anyone. I tried to get him to listen, to come back. He just wouldn't. I couldn't save him, couldn't stop him. His eyes were so full of hatred, of rage. Don't. Please don't. She shook, her hands going to grab the collar of Aizawa's uniform. The man looked in her in the eyes, his voice threatening to break. The Red Hood. Izuku Midoriya. The sun had set many hours ago, clock reading 3 a.m., yet despite the late hour, the bar he sat in was filled to the brim with people. A small smile made its way onto his face, lips parting slightly as he took a drag of the cigarette, balancing in between his index and middle finger. He was tired. His job as an information broker never seemed to end, especially when his top clients destroyed a city. All those resources, and they still need me to do the dirty work. Jiren spoke under his breath, voice muffled slightly by his scarf. He was paid, so there's no real room to complain. Red Hood had done a lot more damage than expected, and although the League's manpower had increased 100-fold from when he first worked with them, they still lacked real power. That's where he came in and why he sat in this particular bar. He had to recruit more outside help. It was already known by now that twice, one of the villains he first introduced to Shigaraki was long dead. With him and Toga gone, there was a gap that needed to be filled. They said as much, and who was he to not take their money in an effort to provide them what they wanted? Not that it was going well. Again, a certain vigilante had become a thorn in his side. Ever since Red Hood's debut, no information about the vigilante could be found. Absolutely obscured. No records of quirks like his, no shipping manifests for the weapons he used, untraceable bullets. If that wasn't enough, his colleagues, his clients, had been culled. Every day, he seemed to lose money. Taking a final drag of his cigarette, Jiren stood, snuffing out the cancer stick in the small porcelain ashtray provided by the establishment. Going to the bathroom, he planned to wash up, at least somewhat. Even he had to go to sleep sometime, and although it was short, he did have some wiggle room in fulfilling their orders. With a loud creak, the bathroom door swung open, Jiren's ears picking up no sound. He was sure he was alone. With a squeak, the bathroom faucet pumped out fresh cold water, the sound reverberating throughout the walls as he raised his head to look in the mirror. Crash! A hand pressed against his head, shoving the side of his face into the glass of the mirror. Glasses falling off his face and onto the ground below. Strained, he only caught a glimpse of his attacker, a grin appearing over his face. "Oh, Red Hood, what can I do for you?" The League. Jiren's face pressed harder against the glass. The man feeling Red Hood's grip, clenching hard enough to rip out his hair if he moved even an inch. "What about them? I'm an information broker, not a mind reader." His snarky remark only earned him a knife through his left hand, pinning it to the wall. Letting out a groan of pain, he heard him speak. "Where are they?" Red Hood's gloved hand applied more pressure, right thumb placed under Jiren's eyes, squeezing. The man groaned in pain. "Sorry, that's not how it works. I work for a price. I have a family to feed too. Besides, betraying my clients won't do my reputation any good. You're not the first to threaten me. You think I haven't experienced something like this before?" Jiren smirked. Of course, living like a rat meant having a target on your back. Heroes, villains, and everyday people had their grievances, but in the underground they knew when to back off. Hurting a broker in a den full of degenerates would be stupid, even for Red Hood. That had been the thought, but Red Hood only wanted to hear information, not his life story. Face squished, Jiren's head was forced to grind against the shattered glass, his flesh being shredded by the broken shards, pieces being embedded deep. He could not struggle against the strength of Red Hood. His left hand still pinned into the wall by a razor-sharp knife. Loyalty meant nothing in the presence of pain. Red Hood would engrave this into the small animal in his palm. With a hard shove, Jiren fell to floor, left arm in the air as the man held his bleeding face. Red Hood placed the heel of his boot against Jiren's left shoulder blade. Yanking his knife upward, he severed the man's ring and middle fingers before taking a hold of the man's arm. Sheathing his knife, he dug into one of the small pockets of his suit. Unlike before, he had taken some time to look through every weapon available to him, finding things that could only be of benefit when used correctly. In coercing a stubborn person, what he needed was fear. A small syringe was held in his right hand. The disgusting orange liquid, bubbling at the surface, was contained within. Uncapping the syringe, he injected Jiren in the neck, before he pushed down with his heel and pulled Jiren's arm. With a wet clack, similar to popping knuckles, he dislocated the man's arm, kicking him down as he waited. He had read the files. The previous Red Hood, Jason Todd, had documented about the toxin. Its effects would make themselves apparent soon. Gee, get them off me. Jiren wriggled on the ground, his still able arms smacking against his body. Red Hood couldn't see the man's fear, but whatever it was, Jiren was desperately trying to get away. Grabbing the man by the neck, Red Hood slammed the man through the nearest stall wall, breaking it apart as he and the broker hit the tiled wall of the bathroom. Said tile cracked and splintered. Jiren's eyes panicked as he began to scream, his eyes never leaving Red Hood's helmet, the vigilante his fear embodied. Gee, get away from me. Red Hood's hand clamped onto the man's neck, Jiren's right hand smacking against the arm holding him. His struggles, pathetic, befitting the man himself. The League. Where are they? What do they have planned? The pressure amplified, Red Hood's helmet inching closer to the man's face. Jiren continued to scream, his voice failing to find words before he began to speak. Tartarus prison. They're trying to free the inmates. I don't know where they are. Could he trust the words of a man under the influence of fear toxin? Of course not. This, however, was better than nothing. If it was Tartarus, he could guess what Shigaraki's next move was. Still, he needed more. He would not let them slip through his hands any longer. Rifling through Jiren's clothes, he took the man's phone and wallet. He would confirm this information in every possible way. He would find where they hid, and when he got his hands on them, he would rip their spine out with his own bare hands. Now, Jiren was the only problem. He had not known Jiren for long. Of course, in the underground, he had heard of the man, but he never had qualms about him. Until he learned. This man was the one who introduced members of the League to Shigaraki. Members such as Dabi and Toga. That itself could not be forgiven, but he dug deeper. The man who provided the warehouse, gave Shigaraki information about him, and Inko provided the chemicals that charred his mother's corpse. It was him. Letting him go was not an option. Even if he didn't play a part in his and his mother's demise, there would be no doubt that this rat wouldn't run back to its owner. Killing him fast was not an option either. For the things he did, he had to suffer. Stabbing his knife through Jiren's shoulder, he reached into his suit. Watching the man still overcome with fear toxin, he began to spray onto the man's chest, his symbol, made with a gel-like substance. Once done, he placed the small gadget onto his belt, sheathing his satin knife. With a hand clutching Jiren's hair, he dragged the man towards the toilet. Without hesitation, Red Hood plunged the broker's head, drowning him. Jiren struggled desperately, right arm, trying to lift himself up out of the water. His fear multiplied with the feeling of suffocation. His struggle slowed, and when Red Hood knew he was unconscious, near death, he stepped back. Gadget back in hand, he walked out of the stall. Click. There was a boom. The result being the same as sticking a live grenade down a person's throat. The ceiling, floor, walls coated in crimson fluid. Red Hood only partly saved by parts of the stall still standing. Toilet exploded. The bathroom began to flood, the water that spilled onto the ground being dyed a reddish pink. Focus shifting towards the bathroom door, he knew that those inside heard it. Even now he could hear tables flipping over, the shuffling of bar patrons. By now, if they hadn't left, that meant only one thing. They were the degenerates Jiren had been meeting, the villains that were going to be recruited into the League's new army. Securing his gadget and items stolen from Jiren, Red Hood reached for his new pistols. A pair of modified M1911s, chambered with jacketed hollow point rounds. Readying his weapons, he only let out a small exhale. The League were next. So, this was the end of Part 4 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.